The night my wife tried to erase me, she used a room full of cameras to do it. Her mistake. She slammed them down so hard the champagne glasses shook. "Sign it, Gibson." Her voice carried across the entire room. "You never belonged in this world. You never belonged in this family. And after tonight, you never belonged in my life." Around us, 500 people held their breath. I looked at the papers. Then I looked at her, and I picked up my pen. Have you ever watched someone hand you the final piece of a trap they don't realize they walked into? Let me take you back. Because what happened in that ballroom didn't start there. It started in a room nobody else knew existed. For 4 years, I was Martha Macleod's husband. To her friends, I was the man she settled for. To her father's board, I was furniture. To Brian West, the man she was meeting privately every Thursday, I was already gone. What none of them knew was that I had been watching every shell transaction, every redirected asset, every dollar Brian West quietly siphoned out of her father's $100 million empire, while Martha smiled for magazine covers and called me inadequate at dinner. I watched all of it, and then, slowly, quietly, without a single person knowing my name, I bought it. All of it. Before we go any further, I need 30 seconds from you. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 10,000 subscribers. But I believe stories like this, about patience, about power, about what happens when a man decides the right moment has finally come, deserve to be heard. Hit like, subscribe, leave a comment. Let's show her these stories matter. Let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's go back to Gibson Macleod, because the pen is still in his hand and Martha has absolutely no idea what he's about to sign. I knew how to disappear in a room. 4 years of marriage to Martha Macleod had made me fluent in it. Stand near enough to look present. Stay quiet enough to be ignored. Smile when her friends looked over. It wasn't weakness. It was strategy. "Tell me, Gibson," Juan said, swirling his glass. "What exactly is it you do again? Martha's never been entirely clear." The table smiled. Martha smiled. I took a slow sip of water. "I manage things," I said. "Quietly." Juan laughed. "Ah, a quiet man in a loud world. How poetic." Daniel Adame raised his glass in mock salute. Martha laughed the loudest. I counted the seconds until I could leave the room. This was my real office. While Martha attended charity luncheons and Juan May's restructured board committees, I sat in here and watched the one thing none of them thought to watch: the Macleod family ledger. The shortfall had started 8 months ago. Small at first. The kind of variance that looks like rounding error if you aren't paying attention. I was paying attention. By the time I found the pattern, the real pattern, the number wasn't small anymore. $104 million. Gone, not lost, not misallocated, moved, carefully, deliberately, in increments designed to stay beneath every regulatory threshold the Macleod board had ever set. Someone inside that company was destroying it from the ground up. And they were doing it well. I didn't call Martha. I thought about it for approximately 4 seconds. Then I remembered the dinner table, her laugh, and I decided that the woman who let Juan Mace mock her husband in her own home didn't deserve a warning. She deserved a front row seat. So I closed the ledger, and I started building something they would never see coming. Brian West wasn't stealing from the company. That would have been simple. What Brian was doing was surgical. He had spent 14 months building a parallel corporate skeleton beneath the Macleod family empire. Every quarter, a percentage of the company's operating revenue would route through a legitimate-looking vendor contract, security consulting, logistics, software licensing, and disappear into an entity called Westbridge Capital Solutions. Westbridge Capital Solutions. registered in Delaware. Sole director, unnamed. I found the director in 40 minutes. It was Brian West. The same Brian West who had been sitting at my father-in-law's boardroom table for 3 years. The same Brian West whose name appeared in Martha's phone more often than mine. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Drain the company slowly enough that no single quarter triggers an audit. Let the debt accumulate. Then, when the empire tips past the point of recovery, step in as a white knight buyer through Westbridge, acquire the collapsed assets at fire sale pricing, and hand Martha the illusion that Brian saved her family. She would be grateful. She would be his. And the $100 million empire her father built from nothing would belong to the man who destroyed it. It was almost impressive. Almost. I had built Halcyon Capital Group 11 years ago. Martha didn't know it existed. Her father didn't know it existed. Brian West, who thought he had mapped every financial power player in this sector, had never once encountered it, because I had made sure of that. Quietly. Deliberately. The same way I did everything. I didn't do it to save Martha. I want to be honest about that. I did it because her father, a man who had shown me more quiet respect in 3 dinners than Martha had shown me in 4 years of marriage, was about to watch everything he built get stripped by a man he trusted. And because Brian West had made one catastrophic miscalculation. He had run his scheme right through the middle of a market I had been watching since before he learned what a shell entity was. He had poisoned a well. He just didn't know I already owned the water. Something had shifted, not dramatically. Martha wasn't dramatic when she was planning, only when she was performing. This was the other version of her. Measured, precise. The version that smiled slightly too long at her phone before turning it face down on the table. Board prep, she said. Don't wait up. I watched the elevator doors close. Then I opened my laptop. Tier 1 press access. That meant cameras. That meant live stream. That meant whatever they were planning, they wanted an audience. I sat with that for a moment. Then I understood. This was never just about the divorce. This was about optics. Brian needed me publicly humiliated before the acquisition completed. Because a disgraced husband makes no credible claim on marital assets. A man signing papers under public pressure, surrounded by press, flanked by the woman leaving him. That man doesn't sue. That man doesn't fight. That man disappears. It was clean. I had to admit, it was clean. He won't cause a scene, Brian said. Gibson doesn't cause scenes. That's his entire personality. Juan laughed. And when it's done, the press has footage of the divorce. The board ratifies the Westbridge transition the following morning. By the time anyone looks at the asset restructure, Gibson is already gone, Martha is already grateful, and we are already controlling a $100 million portfolio that legally belongs to no one who will ever challenge us. Daniel capped his marker. And Martha? Brian smiled. Martha gets what she always wanted. The company. The title. And a man who actually belongs in her world. Corinne, it's time to move Halcyon into the final position. All of it? All of it. I need the ownership transfer ratified before the Mercer ceremony. Not after. Before. A pause. Gibson. Once we do this, there's no quiet version of what happens next. I looked out at the city. At the skyline Martha had always acted like she owned. I know, I said. That's exactly why we're doing it this way. They had spent 3 weeks building a trap. They just hadn't checked whose name was on the deed. I arrived early, not because I was nervous, because I wanted to watch them set up the stage they didn't know belonged to me. She didn't look at me when she entered, which told me everything. She had practiced not looking at me. This was choreographed. At 9:47 p.m., Martha walked to my table. The papers came down hard enough that my champagne glass moved. I looked at them. Then I looked at her, and I picked up my pen. Not to sign, to wait, not glitched, stopped. Every asset value on every display, frozen, and then replaced with one line of text. Ownership, transfer ratified. Halcyon Capital Group. 3 men in dark suits entered from the side corridor. Not security. Federal corporate regulators. The lead counsel stepped to the stage microphone with the unhurried composure of someone delivering information, not drama. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the interruption. We are here to formally ratify a completed acquisition filed at 6:14 this morning with the Federal Corporate Registry. As of today, 100% of Macleod family holdings and all subsidiary entities have been acquired in full by Halcyon Capital Group. He paused. We are also here to present the identity of Halcyon's founding principal, who has requested this disclosure be made publicly and on record. He opened a document, read one name, mine. I set the pen down, stood up, straightened my jacket. You asked me to sign, Martha. My voice was even, quiet. The same voice I had used at every dinner table where someone laughed at my silence. But the company your father built, the one Brian has been systematically dismantling for 14 months, now belongs to me. I picked up the divorce papers. So, before I sign anything, perhaps we should discuss what exactly it is you think you're walking away with. The trap had been built for me. I had simply moved the walls. Martha hadn't moved. She was still standing at my table, still in the white pantsuit, still holding the narrative she had written for tonight, except the ending had been replaced while she wasn't looking. Juan Mace left without being asked. Daniel Adame asked for his attorney before he reached the door. Neither of them looked at Martha. That, I think, was the moment she began to understand the full geometry of what Brian had built around her. She hadn't just lost her husband, she had lost the men who were using her to lose him. Gibson? I'm going to sign them, I said, quietly, without anger. Not because you asked me to. Not because Brian orchestrated it. Because this marriage ended long before tonight. And we both know it. I signed. 2 places. Clean lines. Slid the papers back across the table. The attorneys will be in touch about asset delineation. Everything tied to Halcyon remains with Halcyon. Your personal accounts are untouched. She stared at me. That's it? That's it, I said. I picked up my jacket. Take care of yourself, Martha. And I walked off the stage she had built to destroy me. The Empire's full encryption archive had transferred to Halcyon at 6:14 that morning. I had been working through it for weeks, but there was one partition I hadn't been able to open. A private directory, password protected, labeled with a single word, my name. My hands moved slowly across the keyboard. The decryption key Corin had pulled from the archive. I entered it. The folder opened. Inside, one document. A letter, dated 7 years ago. From Edmund Macleod. To me. Edmund Macleod had known who I was before I ever walked through his door. He had known about Halcyon. He had known about my family. And he had introduced Martha to me, not accidentally, not organically, but deliberately. Because Edmund Macleod, the man I had spent 14 months quietly trying to protect, had discovered 11 years ago that his company's founding capital had been built on assets that weren't legally his, and my family was the one he had taken them from. Martha wasn't his attempt to love me into the family. She was his attempt to keep me from ever looking too closely at where the money came from. I sat with that for a long time. The city outside the window had no idea. I was beginning to understand that neither had I. Here is what I know about power. Real power isn't loud. It doesn't slam divorce papers on mahogany tables in front of press cameras. It doesn't need an audience to feel real. Real power is the thing you build in a room nobody knows exists. In the dark. while everyone who underestimates you is busy performing for the crowd. Brian West built a scheme, Juan Mice and Daniel Adam built a cover. Martha built an exit. Edmund Macleod built a lie so elaborate it lasted 11 years. And I built Halcyon, quietly, patiently, one acquisition at a time. What happens next? The legal reckoning, the recovered assets, the question of what Edmund truly owed my family. That is a longer story. But tonight, in this office, in this city, with a signed divorce paper and an open letter that changes everything I thought I understood about my own life, I am, for the first time in 4 years, exactly where I am supposed to be. Alone, clear-eyed, and just getting started. If this story moved something in you, if you have ever been the person in the room that everyone looked past, then you already understand Gibson Macleod. You know what it costs to stay quiet when every instinct tells you to fight back. And you know that the most dangerous move a person can make is patience. This channel exists for stories like this one. Subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment. Tell me, what would you have done with that letter? I read every single one. Until the next story. Remember, the quietest person in the room is rarely the least powerful one. They're just waiting for the right moment to sign.